The biggest mystery of Dragon's Rising is definitely Ras's Master. It has been set up since the very beginning of the show, and a lot of people are definitely wondering who it could actually be. There are many interpretations on who Ras's Master could actually be. There are many theories surrounding it, many characters that have been thrown out, some old, some new, some characters that we haven't really seen much of, and some that we have seen near enough in every single season of Dragon's Rising. There are so many options when it does come down to it, but I'm going to be perfectly honest, I've never really been content with any of the answers. I've never stood by the Zarkar theory, I've never stood by the Source Dragon of Strength theory, I've never even stood by the Wu theory before that was debunked. The thing is that there are just so many different options, but I just really never saw any of them, until recently. So in this video, I'm going to be going over my findings when it does come to Ras's Master. Also explain how I got there, because I do find it fairly funny. Because I've been trying to figure out who Ras's Master is for a very, very long time. And when I say that, I mean years. But I finally have an answer that I'm happy with, and an answer that I actually do have some evidence for. So, I want you guys to hear me out. Of course, I would like to know your opinion on it as well. But I really do like this idea, and I really do think there's a chance I may be correct. So let me not waste any more of your time, and let's actually talk about who is Ras's Master. Allow me to set the stage. I have been recently re-watching all of Dragon's Rising. I have been going through it because I've just kind of been in the mood to re-watch it all. And I've certainly developed a lot of my opinions when it does come to all of the seasons. I'm currently on Season 3 Part 2 as of the time of making this video. But the thing is that I've definitely been trying to figure out who Ras's Master for a while. And I've never actually seen any true indication on who it could actually be. Like I said in the intro, there have been many characters that people have assumed to be Ras's Master, but it never really felt like any of them actually had anything proper. One of the more popular ones is the Zarkar theory, and I know a lot of people base it on the appearance of him and how he's been set up throughout Dragon's Rising, but it just never felt overly substantial, and I just can't really see it being the case. Of course, this may age horribly, and I will point it out if I am, but the thing is that it just never really worked, and all the other theories just never really made sense to me. The Source Dragon of Strength theory just never worked, the Wu theory just seemed off, and it just felt like the details were lining up to be someone who was actually different. But like I said, I was rewatching Dragon's Rising, and in Season 2 Part 1, there was a very specific line that has been pointed out that I really do think means more than we initially realized. It came from the episode where we were introduced to Rontu and Egalt. They talk about how they refuse to train the ninja, and they refer to the fact that they haven't taught any sort of humans in centuries, and they have absolutely no intention on doing so. But the reason they cite, I think, is fairly interesting. They talk about how the last student they had was such a disappointment, and they both understood how it ended up. They seriously had to swear off teaching humans for literal centuries. That is something that must have been very strong and very much against their own beliefs, to the point where they had that kind of vendetta. And I do think to an extent that's not just some offhanded line. Things like this are very important within Ninjago, and I have found these offhanded lines are often the setup to something bigger and the answer to something more. And as soon as I heard it, I immediately questioned what that line did truly mean. But then as I started watching through the rest of Dragon's Rising in context of Ras's Master, it started to actually make a little bit of sense to me. What if this final student of Rontu and Egalt was Ras's Master? What if this individual is the person who is behind all of this? And you may think this is just some blind theory with no backing whatsoever and just some random pull at some strings, but I really do think that the evidence and what we know about Ras's Master lines up in context of a former student of the Dragon Masters. So let's get into the evidence I've actually got when it does come to this theory, because that is what matters above all else. I'm going to go from least believable to most believable evidence. For one, this does actually explain how Wu would be aware of who Ras's Master is. It has been confirmed that Wu is aware of the Master and actually knows the identity of it. But the thing is that we have never actually had an explanation on how this simply is the case. But the thing is that if they are linked back to Rontu and Egalt, we know that Rontu and Egalt have a link back to the first Binjitsu Master. Rontu and Eagle were actually taught by Ezekiel Coldfang the Wise, and that dragon was actually trained by the King Erd Leatherwing. But the thing is that King Erd Leatherwing was trained by the first Spinjitzu master who would have retained all of this knowledge. This knowledge on all of these scrolls were then eventually passed down to Wu, who has been reading through all of them. So it makes sense that there would be some text revolving around who this person actually is. If the first Spinjitzu master was actually bookkeeping, then it would truly make sense. And the thing is that even if you can't accept the link up and back down to Wu, the other thing is that it would line up timeline wise with Wu himself. It would make sense to believe that Wu is around by this point in time. So Wu would be vaguely aware of another human being trained by a Dragon Master. Like I said, this goes on to show how there is a link between the two characters, and it could explain away how they have some sort of interactions between the two of them. Like I said, that is the first piece, and in my opinion, the least convincing. The second piece of evidence that I do have is actually to do with the age of Ras Master. When asked about his age to Doc actually stated that his age is actually a great question that would be explored. We do not have an exact specification, but he said that to someone who asked if Ras Master existed before time had a name. I don't think that this is the case. I don't think they existed before Wu, but the thing is that it does go to show that there is a high potential that Ras Master did exist at the time where Rontu and Eagle would have been training that former Dragon Master, because we are talking thousands of years by this point, so it would make sense to believe that a being who is currently around with the knowledge and the patience that has been specified would also have been around during that time. The third piece of evidence that I have is actually down to Eagles himself. Of course, like I said, Eagles is strictly anti-human, to the point where he hasn't interacted with them for years on end. A very long-standing grudge like that is not easily come by, but if the last student he had turned out to be one of the more evil people we've ever seen across the entire franchise, it would make sense to show why Eagles is actually capable of that much hatred. It would go to show that he truly does not stand by the actions of Ras Master. It would honestly track, all things considered. But would you actually be interested to hear that that is not my most convincing and my weakest evidence when it does come to this link? I truly do believe that I have much better than that. So, starting off with the next piece of evidence that I do have, for one, it explains Ras's Forbidden 5 knowledge. Ras is completely and keenly aware of all of the ins and outs of the Forbidden 5 knowledge that we do know for a fact was sealed away and was hidden from anyone to actually find. This is something that is not easily come by, but it seems to be that Ras Master is in complete knowing of what's going on with those characters. The thing is that if you think of it in context of a former student of Eagles and Rontu, it would actually make complete sense. If he was training with the two dragons around the time they had to become the force from the east, it would completely make sense as to why Ras Master is aware of what's actually going on, aware of how the battle took place, aware of where the Forbidden 5 ended up, aware of the fact that you required Source Dragon energy to reopen the Shadow Dojo, aware of the Blood Moon, the ins and outs of the Blood Moon, the spell that was actually used to seal them up in the first place, and how it can actually be reversed. All of these little aspects are things that shouldn't be easily known, but Ras Master does know it. But if he's a former student of Rontu and Eagles, it works, and it completely explains away why he's aware of knowledge that the two dragons actually did seal off. But interestingly, thinking of sealed off information, it transitions into the next piece of evidence. Ras Master, his abilities and his actual things that he has demonstrated that he's able to do, isn't known information. At the end of Season 2 Part 1, we actually get to see Ras Master teleport away a building, the entirety of the Wolf Army, at a moment's notice, and we actually get a scene a little bit later of the Cloud Monks specifying that they are not familiar with these abilities. The abilities of Ras Master is not known by the Cloud Kingdom monks, people who have archived knowledge of everything that is going on within the merged realms. What is the only thing that shares that trait? The knowledge of the Forbidden 5. If Ras's master has gone on to do the things that he has done, and Ronto and Egot were the master of that student, wouldn't they want to get rid of that information? Wouldn't they want to get rid of all knowledge of what that person has done? Wouldn't they want to erase them from existence, because they probably did trap him away like they actually did do with the Forbidden Five? It's the only other time we've heard about knowledge not being known to the Cloud Kingdom monks. It is the only time we've actually had this thing come back up, and they took the time to clarify that they weren't aware of Ras Master's abilities, drawing a direct link to the Forbidden Five. It makes sense in this context, it works, and honestly, it's a bit too convenient. Ronto and Egot quite simply wouldn't want the dark secrets of Ras Master or their former student to be known, because like I said, by all accounts, its individuals rose to a power level that has been previously unseen. They currently reside within the Cauldron of Realms. They're not exactly a being with little to no energy, so I think Ronto and Egot would seek to it that no one else can actually achieve that. It completely fits in what Ronto and Egot would do in a situation like this. And the last piece of evidence for me that honestly does still kind of confirm that there's something here is actually the presence of Ronto. And you may be initially questioning what I mean by this, and it is really funny, but I actually do think, again, this is an indication that there is some sort of link to Ronto when it does come to Ras Master. The fact that Ronto is introduced in Season 2 Part 1 and has remained a fairly consistent aspect of the show since then, you know, a show where the side characters are quite typically just gotten rid of or just simply don't have any lines, it is extremely fascinating to note that Ronto is about. She has had a very interesting presence within the show. Of course, she is training Ryu in the ways of Spin Jitsu, but the thing is that that whole thing and that whole little arc between the two of them feels extremely drawn out, like they're basically biding their time for the next thing. And like I said, there's been so much emphasis put on Ronto. She's having her own scene, she's having her own dialogue, she's having her own moments. There's a lot going on with this character, and it's honestly always made me wonder what's going on. But again, if you think of it in context of Ras Master, it does actually make complete sense here. Ronto is remaining in the show because when the time comes to reveal who Ras Master is, she will serve as the exposition dump as to what the backstory of Ras Master is. We will actually see her talk about training him, talk about the descent into evil, the descent into darkness, the removal of the information about him. It does actually fit as to why Ronto is still here, because I really don't think she would be otherwise. They have had every single opportunity to take her out of the show, but they quite simply haven't. And I just don't think that is a coincidence whatsoever. We are looking at main characters that don't get this much aspects given to them. We're looking at the likes of Pixel, who returned in Season 3 Part 1 just to basically have 10 lines between Season 3 Part 2 and Season 4 Part 1. And I think that's me being generous. So I do think when it ultimately comes down to it, I think Ronto being in the story very clearly has to mean something. And taking that into consideration with everything else I have discussed so far, I think I have actually hit the reason why. And like I said, that reason why is because this former student is Ras Master. I think on an overall, I have found enough evidence that has compelled me to believe that this truly is the case. I may be wrong, and there's honestly a good chance that I am. But the thing is that I honestly do think that there's something going on here. I think there are too many little bits of information that line up too much between the correlations here. I think the information fits, and that is why I want to present it to you guys. Because I do actually wonder what you guys think here. Do you believe me when I say that it could actually be this former student? Do you believe me when I say that it could actually have some sort of relevance here, and it would make sense as to why we have so much that we do when it does come to Dragon's Rising? There are of course so many more questions when it does come to this character. Why haven't they been introduced more prominently? Why do we not know their name? Why do we not know how they're in the Cauldron of Realms? How do we not know where their power came from? I think all of that will be explained down the line, and I do think it still does line up with what we know here. It would actually make sense that a student of this power would be trained under Dragon Masters that are directly tied back to the first Spin Jitsu Master. It works in that context. And the thing is that I do think there's one more thing that I can hypothesize, although I don't have any sort of backing for it. I think with all of this power and the teachers and everything we've discussed in mind, I actually also think that Ras Master is a former Source Dragon conduit. I think that this individual is actually someone who has actually had contact with the Source Dragons before. Again, it would explain the knowledge of the icons, it would explain the knowledge of the merge, it would explain the knowledge that Ras actually knows, and the last thing, I think I know which conduit it is, the Source Dragon of Strength. And of course, you may be wondering why I'm bringing this individual into it, especially considering that people thought he was Ras's master. But the thing is, I think he was the conduit, and again, in similar vein to Eagles, it would explain why the Source Dragon of Strength hates humans. Because again, you link them together in context of Ras's master, and it just simply fits. But this is where I am going to pass it off to you guys. I would like to know what you think of this theory. Is there any more evidence that you have that relates to this? Is there any of the evidence that you don't agree with? I would love to know, because honestly, all things considered, and after years of trying to figure out who Ras's master is, I finally feel content. I finally feel like I have a theory that I truly do believe in. And that is why I want to know what you guys think, because I would like to know if I'm entirely wrong when it does come down to it. But thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please consider subscribing. I'd love discussing Ninjago with more people. And if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of you, your support means the absolute world to me, and I cannot thank you enough. But like I said, that's about it for today, and take care. Okay,